Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. We're back in London, back in the UK. A nation not of shopkeepers. No, no, no. It's a nation of real estate agents. Yes, the backbone of any great casino capitalist nation, estate agents. 1 in 4 jobs created in the UK this year were in the property sector. That makes a total of 562,000 British residents engaged in selling you shares in what many call George Osborne's housing bubble Ponzi. His mother, his wife, and 562,000 estate agents disagree, of course. They think Osborne's Help to Buy scheme is frickin' genius. Stacy, I need to know more. Or is it frickin' disingenuous?
Well, Max, we had to rush back from New York to London to sort this out because I was surprised to see all these headlines while flying back because record number of estate agents raises fears of an unsustainable housing bubble. ONS data shows 562,000 people work in real estate sector, the largest number since records began in 1978. And as you said in the opening, 1 in 4 new jobs, 25% of new jobs are in the real estate sector.
Well, this is a remarkable development. You've got 500,000 real estate agents selling property back and forth to each other, inflating the price every single transaction thanks to money printing from Mark Carney. So you've got Mark Carney, George Osborne, and the real estate sector colluding in a triangle of fraud, creating a massive bubble that I have said on this show will pop within 24 months or I will eat my pants. And now a month has gone by, so within 23 months. And this is the way all bubbles form and crash in this modern monetarist economy, post-Milton Friedman, post-supply and demand, post-wages for capital, post-capitalism.
And all these jobs are, of course, are wealth redistribution. They're paper shufflers, just shifting wealth from one person to another, mostly from the young to the old. Whatever wealth those young have, it's mostly through leverage, it's mostly through debt, because of course they don't have the money to put down as a deposit on a property, which is why the Help to Buy scheme is there in order to provide this deposit. This is the first wave. Now the second wave comes in January 2014, and that's open to pretty much everybody. And it's providing, taxpayer guarantees on mortgages up to £600,000, which is about $1 million.
Well, because the price of the real estate will crash again, guaranteed, think of it this way. This is an interest-free loan from Mark Carney to speculators. In other words, if you're a friend of Mark Carney, if you're part of the elite class in the UK, he will give you a loan that you never have to pay back. In other words, he's just gifting you money. The fact that it's being washed through the facade of the real estate market is just for cosmetic purposes so that the Daily Telegraph or the Guardian or the BBC can talk about the real estate market as if it's a needed component in this fraud. It's not. It's just the front end of the fraud. To make it look as though there's economic activity going on. But when you scrap away the real estate, and you will once it crashes, and you end up with, once again, the UK economy will be at record debt. I predict £4 trillion in debt when this bubble pops within 2 years. And you end up with oligarchs and kleptocrats. Unemployment will be at sky high, and you'll have, of course, social unrest.
Of course, a lot of this could be down to bankers and elite front-running. Basically George Osborne's next wave of the scheme. Remember, it doesn't start until January 2014, which is when the crazy stuff, the crazy backing by the taxpayer comes in. Now, there are lots of calls for the government to not introduce that. But of course, they've got their constituents who want to flip their house, but also the bankers pushing them towards this. Now, Edwin Conway, I think he's a Telegraph opinion maker, commentator, he said that in Kensington and Chelsea, for example, house prices are at 28.9 times earning.
Well, this reminds me of that old Woody Allen joke. He goes to the doctor and says, "Doctor, my brother thinks he's a chicken." And the doctor says, "Well, we'll give him these pills." And the guy says, "No, you don't understand. We need the eggs." In other words, the UK economy is based on fraud. They need to keep the Ponzi scheme going to put the money into the politicians' pockets, like Cameron and Osborne and the rest, to keep their election prospects current, but at the end of the day, they're psychotic, headless chickens running around selling back and forth to each other worthless properties that within 24 months will crash and leave a lot of misery, a lot of tears.
Now, Mark Carney, who you mentioned many times, he used to head the Bank of Canada. Well, he's left behind an even more epic housing bubble there, and that is getting and growing worse. A higher percentage of Canadians are employed in construction now than pre-recession, much higher level than the US. Now, if you look at the chart, the red line there is in Canada and the blue line is the US, to compare those two. So nearly 8% of Canadians are working in the real estate sector, and that compares to the US. At their peak in 2006, it was about 5.5% of Americans worked in the real estate sector. Now it's about 4%.
Well, this is Icarus economics. Well, we can't build wax wings big enough to fly closest to the sun fast enough, because we can't crash soon enough, because then we can't get our bailout from the taxpayers, who will then be asked to suffer austerity again. Remember, there's two things going on. There's a wealth transfer of the public funds to a few private speculators, and then there's the essentially extermination of the poor in this country and other countries, who will be left to rot on the sidewalk and bleed to death. But that's the plan.
Another chart goes with this headline here from Canada. And if you look at this is household credit to disposable income. As you can see, it just continues to rise, rise, rise. There is no sign of any sort of slowdown in terms of their debt to how much they earn. And again, this is a problem because it's not real wealth creation. It's only actually making the problem worse for the future, because they're just bringing forward more and more of the future.
The government, the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve Bank, will say, we can do this because there's no inflation. Now, they only look at a number of CPI or other index, which is based on things that are not moving up in price, like electronics made by slaves in China, or textiles and clothing made by slaves in China and Vietnam. Simply by putting house prices into the index, then inflation's running at 10, 12% in the UK, which is getting close to hyperinflation. They choose not to recognize this. It's disingenuous. It's not genius. And then when it crashes, of course, they'll say, we never saw it coming. The market is unpredictable. I made another $1 billion. I don't know how that happened. Oh my God! I just never seem to stop making money. I don't know how that happens. And Mark Carney will go to some other country and ruin their economy. He ruined Canada. He's ruining Britain. He'll end up, I don't know where else, Vietnam maybe.
But it's also a gross misallocation of capital, and it's encouraged and fostered, and the situation happens because of the government intervention. Now, they're also choosing the winners who are actually losers. I mean, these guys are normally losers, the sort of loser in a casino who hangs out all night drinking the free whiskey and gambling and losing, but they're kept in there, and they're kept, you know, they want to be kept in the casino by the owners of the casino, because they're the losers are the best to have. Now we're going to see this government intervention backing the losers to be the so-called winners. DeVry lures medical school rejects as taxpayers fund debt. These medical rejects, the ones that apply for universities in America, medical schools in America, and the article interviews many of them who have been rejected from 24, 30, 40 schools across America. Well, DeVry accepts them. DeVry, which has 2 for-profit medical schools in the Caribbean, is accepting hundreds of students who were rejected by U.S. medical schools. These students amass more debt than their U.S. counterparts, a median of $253,072 in June 2012 at AUC versus $170,000 for 2012 graduates of U.S. medical schools. So that figure in the U.S. only includes the undergraduate and medical school, whereas the ones for DeVry include only the 4 years of their medical school. Now, the 2 schools they mentioned there are Ross University School of Medicine and American University of Caribbean, which is AUC.
Right, so these are students that would accidentally remove people's liver, or cut off the wrong foot, or show up in the operating room stoned. So they go down to Jamaica, and they rack up, they perfected a couple of procedures, the debtectomy, where they removed the equitable assets from one household and they turn it into debt and transfuse it into the households of another location. This is the famous DeVries graduate debtectomy procedure, which ends up racking up, another. Well, what's the student loan debts in America now? It's over $1 trillion. It's bigger than the subprime bubble before it burst. Is now the student loan bubble. So you've got a bunch of cracked out methamphetamine smoking losers racking up huge debt, and that's what they're good for. They can't do a simple procedure. They can't figure out how to put a Band-Aid on a cut on your finger, but they can rack up $500 million in debt.
Well, exactly. So this school accepts 900 to 950 students a year. That's 7 times more than any U.S. medical school, which accepts on average 139 a year. But the point is that these people that are going to DeVry have been rejected by all the U.S. schools. Their grades weren't good enough. The average MCAT, the medical college admission test score, down at DeVry is 25 compared to the U.S. schools where it's 31.2.
Why don't they just run an electric current through a petri dish and call that a medical student?
Exactly. Well, this is kind of what they're doing, but the taxpayer is subsidizing it because these students, and though neither AUC nor Ross in the island nation of Dominica is accredited by the body that approves medical programs in the U.S., students at both schools are eligible for loans issued by the U.S. Education Department. The loans, which totaled about $310 million in the year ended June 2012, leave the U.S. taxpayer, not DeVry, on the hook if students should fail to get jobs and be unable to repay them. For example, the article interviews a guy who was rejected by 24 schools in America. He's been accepted there. He's now got $400,000 in debt that he can never escape because, of course, you can't escape student debts. DeVry is paid by the taxpayer of the United States. Now, the taxpayer of the United States can pursue this guy forever, but he failed 24 admissions tests for other universities. What are his chances of becoming a doctor?
Well, he could become Chancellor of the Exchequer because he's demonstrated an ability to be completely incompetent and rack up huge debts.
Or Federal Reserve Chairman. Of course, they're still looking for somebody.
Good point. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. I'll be speaking with Simon Rose of Save Our Savers, who is absolutely appalled at these recent developments, and we'll get his take on things, so stay right there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. As we're back in London, the first thing we needed to do is check in with Simon Rose of SaveOurSavers.co.uk to find out what financial and economic crimes Mark Carney and George Osborne have committed against the British population in our absence. Simon Rose, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to England.
Oh, fantastic. Now, here's a headline from the Telegraph. New threat to savings rate from regulators. A crackdown on so-called teaser rates could keep rates at rock bottom and leave savers exposed to random rate cuts. What about it?
The problem is that a lot of institutions try and tempt savers in with these great rates. Post Office, I think, has got one at the moment, which is something like 2.65%. But after a year, it drops to just 0.1%. And, of course, they do this knowing that many people simply will not move their account once it gets back to a negligible rate of interest. And the Financial Conduct Authority wants to have a look at this and see if it's a good idea or not. And opinion is divided because many savers are very active and they will always try and get the best rate. But, of course, the reason there are bonus rates is the majority of people either can't be bothered, or they don't know, or they're too apathetic, or they're just fed up of these people stealing their money anyway, and they stay with these accounts and they get next to nothing.
What about these P2P lending services in the UK who match borrowers and lenders and offer savers 4 or 5% on their savings?
Well, of course, what's happened is now that savings has gone from being a risk-free return to a return-free risk, people are looking for other ways of getting a better yield on their money. And peer-to-peer lending is certainly one of them. It's growing massively. I mean, you have to say it's not safeguarded in the way that your savings is. You are taking a greater risk. The more respectable companies want to be regulated. They're going to be regulated soon. But yeah, there you're getting, as you say, you can get 4 or 5%, though the rates are not quite as good as they were.
But they're filling a vacuum in that the banks are acting irresponsibly because they're in league with the Bank of England and they're manipulating through financial oppression rates artificially low to help speculators. So P2P lending, which matches borrowers and lenders, offer savers a 4.5% return on savings, which is a more traditional rate, which is what they should be getting at Barclays and Lloyd's. If those banks weren't in the business of in league with the devil, Mark Carney, to create this artificial Ponzi scheme housing bubble.
Well, I think one of the members of the Bank of England, I think Mr. Wheatley, can't quite remember, actually says he thinks in the future peer-to-peer lenders may replace the banks because that's exactly what they're doing. They're bringing together borrowers and lenders. And isn't that what the banks are supposed to be doing? Is that what the banks are doing? No. All they're doing is taking cheap government money and funneling it through to the mortgage market so that house prices go up. But as for helping actual businesses that might actually want to develop and produce growth, forget it.
The Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors has proposed that the government cap house price rises at 5%. So, a government cap to resolve a problem of government intervention.
Isn't it great? This is a wonderful story, yes. George Osborne produced these measures to get the house price market moving just in time for the next general election, because he believes that if house prices go up, everybody will feel nice and warm and fuzzy, and they'll all vote for him. And then, of course, as soon as house prices do start going up, best estimates are we're now getting 6% rise in house prices annually. Then we get the RICS saying, ooh, we might get another house price bubble. We better try and nip it in the bud. I mean, unintended consequences, we have seen so many in the last 5 years. And now, of course, that things are getting increasingly desperate, we're going to be seeing more and more of them. So as you say, yeah, on the one hand, they're trying to push house prices up. On the other hand, they're getting people screaming, we mustn't have house prices going up.
Well, it shows two things. One is financial illiteracy, that they don't understand that by printing money, you create house price inflation.
Yeah.
So if they didn't want house price inflation, they would cut back on printing money.
Yeah.
Second of all, this 6% rise in house prices, wow, that just happens to be about 1 or 1.5% similar to what a saver would get if they weren't just in the business of underwriting speculation in the housing market. So that 6% is what a saver would get if they were just adding to the capitalist system. Remember, savers are providing the capital that fuel capitalism.
Yes,
House
absolutely.
price speculators are adding to the debt, which has contributed to the UK becoming a centrally planned, Politburo-style Soviet Union kleptocracy.
Can't disagree with any of that.
Okay.
What's interesting, you're talking about the creation of money, of course, and if you look at house prices, across the country, yes, they're rising at 6%, but not in some of the far reaches. Once you get away from London, in most places, house prices are not rising very much at all.
You have
it's
a
where the
statistic.
money is being created.
You have a
in London.
statistic there.
The houses in the capital's 10 most expensive boroughs are now worth as much as the entire property of Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland combined. So it's where the money's being created is where the inflation is, in London, by the city.
Right. In an economy that's a fair market or free market or capitalist economy that's based on the concept of a meritocracy, the distribution of wealth would be hegemonic. It wouldn't be concentrated in, if I said that correctly, and if I use the word hegemonic correctly, I'm going to go back and review the tape.
I'm nodding.
You're nodding.
I can wait till I get to a dictionary.
But in other words, because the proximity of the London housing market to the Bank of England, and they're printing the money, their prices are going up, and then the money is never making it out to the sticks, as we would say in the United States. So now, isn't this just like you're at the head of the river, and then as the river flows north, in this case, it gets full of toxic securities and toxic business and toxic political policies, and then the people in Manchester and the people in Birmingham and Sheffield end up living downriver, so to speak, with all the garbage that ends up in that water that's originating from London, and we're talking about financial garbage, which is destroying them financially.
No, that's absolutely right. But QE and inflation both are benefiting the incredibly wealthy, just like in the States. What's happened in the last 5 years is there's been a massive transfer of wealth upwards. And people should be objecting violently. It's an extraordinary change in the social climate and construction of the country. We're benefiting the very, very wealthy. They're the only people who are doing well out of what is happening, and it's utterly disgraceful. It's going to mean the evisceration of the middle class. Anybody who's got money, they are just trying to get what they can to grab it for themselves. And it's quite unashamed and extraordinarily bad.
Now, in Poland recently, they grabbed some pension assets. And this is on top of what we saw recently in Cyprus with the so-called bail-in. MF Global in the United States, the JP Morgan grabbed people's deposits. But you pointed out before the show, I want you to get into it, to mention it again, you know, the UK had a similar pension grab.
Yeah, I mean, this grab in Poland, they only took the bonds, they didn't take the equities, and the Prime Minister said it's going to make the pension assets much safer, being in state hands, of course. But we mustn't forget that George Osborne, ahead of the post office privatisation, did pretty much the same. He took 28 billion of the post office pension funds assets from them. He's not actually accounting for any of the liabilities, which is getting on for 40 billion, but he's using it to make it look as though our debt is rather lower than it was. And no doubt somewhere down the line, people in the post office pension fund are going to be screaming because they don't have an adequate pension.
Well, isn't this part of the modus operandi of these kleptocrats, is that they say, you workers, you people on union contracts, you need to adjust your expectations and get with the program and compete with Chinese slave labor. And they vilify the worker with one hand while stealing their pension money with the other hand.
Yeah, and we mustn't forget, average earnings in this country in the last 5 years have fallen 7%. The majority of people are feeling much, much poorer. Why are people
they've had
not
their pension
angrier?
stolen.
Why
Well,
is everyone not as angry as you, Max? This is what I want to know.
Well, I think it's because things, if I may speak on this, are still remarkably cheap relative to billions of people around the world who are struggling to put food into their mouth. There's a complacency driven by the fact that the UK and the US are still beneficiaries of slave labor in China. You can go to Primark here and get a suit of clothes, an outfit of clothes for 15 pounds because there's people in Bangladesh and Vietnam and China who are dying, who are being worked as slaves so that people can shop at Primark and get it cheaper. Same thing in the food industry. It's subsidized in ways that hurt people in other countries. So the UK empire and the American empire of debt is still very much in place, and there's beneficiaries in both countries. That's why there's no public unrest. However, when this Ponzi scheme blows up, when George Ponzi scheme, Osborne's Ponzi scheme blows and prices double or triple in a week or a month, and suddenly you paying double or triple for food and energy, yeah, then, as you're alluding to, you will see what The Economist magazine would euphemistically call a breakdown in social cohesion.
Yes.
Okay, now, opinion is unanimous that Osborne's Help to Buy scheme, which only gets more extreme from January of 2014, is the cause of the current mania. 1 in 4 so-called jobs created this year are in property. We talked about this in the first half of the show with Stacy Herbert. Isn't this effectively a government works program? Again, a capitalist society, why are they putting real estate agents to work,
Why did
flipping...
Roosevelt in the New Deal not actually put estate agents to work? Yet somehow they weren't mentioned in the New Deal. It's extraordinary, isn't it? Estate agencies, and it's terrible. If we were actually building more houses so we could satisfy the demand in the housing market, you could understand it. But you can't export a house. Just boosting house prices of itself is not beneficial to the economy as a whole. But of course, that's not the way they're going to treat it. If the numbers are going up, it'll all look nice and cozy, and maybe they'll get re-elected.
All right, now, Simon Rose, unlike the bubble and pop in this country a few years ago of the real estate business market, along with the subprime crash in America, there seems to be a growing awareness in the public and in the press that we are in fact in a bubble. Now, this is different, I think, than in previous bubbles. And we're seeing the alternative media really get involved in ways that completely transform the Syrian situation. The UK voted no. Larry Summers at the Fed, public outcry, said this guy is a financial terrorist, and he himself, I think, woke up one day and said he didn't want to be scrutinized by alternative media as a financial terrorist, so he withdrew. Now people are saying, you know what, this is a housing bubble. So at what point does George Osborne throw himself on his own sword, commit ceremonial seppuku, and rid the society of his presence?
When we see a flock of pigs flying across the sky behind us, I imagine. No politician ever is going to admit that they're wrong, and certainly not Cameron Osborne.
What do they do in Japan? Why can't they be more Japanese? Why can't
when
they...
was the last Japanese politician fell on their sword? I think it's a thing of the past now.
Well,
But no, you're right. People are at least talking about the housing bubble and recognizing it, and with luck, after that, they will begin realizing that QE and inflation are, stealing money from savers, giving it to the imprudent borrowers. We just need to get the word out. I mean, at least the public are waking up to what is going on, finally. Osborne, well, one day we'll put him in the Tower of London.
Yeah, he's right there. It says right there.
Lock the door and throw away the key.
I can read it from here. It said, enter to the Tower Gate. Right there. It's for traitors. It says right there, traitors.
Traitors Gate.
That's the Traitors Gate. That's got Osborne's name all
Osborne is
over.
a traitor to all the savers of Britain, who he promised he was going to help before he actually got into power. So, yeah, we'll see him there.
All right, well, we're out of time. We're going to have to say goodbye, and we'll have you on again soon. Simon Rose from Save Our Savers, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
And that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Simon Rose of SaveOurSavers.co.uk. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us a Keiser Report, and also make sure to tune in to our Google Hangout tonight, Thursday, the 19th of September at 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. That's GMT. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.